Okay, you know what? Wait a sec. Before we do this, okay. You've probably heard this one before. So there were two ministers who lived on opposite sides of town. And every Sunday morning they would ride their bikes to their different churches, and they, in the middle, would pass each other, and they would jingle their bicycle bells, say hello. And one Sunday, one of the ministers was walking, and the other one stopped his bicycle. He said, "Hey, what happened to your bike?" His friend said, "It was stolen." And I can't believe I'm saying this. I think it was stolen by a member of my own congregation. And his friend said, "Oh, these dark times that we've fallen on, unbelievable." He said, "Listen, here's what you need to do. Whatever you're going to preach about this Sunday, save it for next Sunday. You need to give a sermon about the 10 Commandments. And when you get to thou shalt not steal, you need to look around, make eye contact with every single person in the room, and the thief will reveal himself." Well, the following Sunday, they were passing each other on their bikes. They stopped in the middle. "Hey, I'm glad to see you got your bike back. It looks like the 10 Commandments sermon worked." He said, "Yeah, it did. I mean, not quite the way I expected, but I was preaching, and when I got to thou shalt not commit adultery, I remembered where I left my bike." So this means that we've got two freebies here, because I've just named 2 of the 10 Commandments. And now I want to see if we together as a team can get the other 8. So we've got 2.
You did the easy one. Thou shalt not kill.
Oh, there we go. Thou shalt not kill. That's 3.
Honor thy father and thy mother.
4, excellent, good. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house, thy neighbor's livestock, thy neighbor's wife. You know,
I don't know if I can name all the other 5, but I think all the other 5 is the perpetration of God.
that's I think you're right.
I am the Lord thy God, thou shalt not make false gods before me.
Oh, I like that. Definitely get me.
I was raised as a Catholic.
Maybe. I mean, you know, or in a synagogue. Like, okay, we've got 6. Let's keep going. Now the second one. Now the first one, I am the Lord thy God. You shall not have other gods beside me. The second one is very much like it, which makes it kind of confusing. You will not. We've got 35 minutes here, so you know. You will not create for yourself an image, a graven image. Do we have any more? You will not bear false witness. You will observe the Sabbath and keep it holy. And the other one I think is, I don't think we said you will not, oh no, we did say that one. Theft, adultery, murder. Come on, let's get it. Let's get the one more. No. Oh, what? No. I mean, it's right here. It's here in this presentation. We're going to see it. We're even going to find out about some of the additional commandments that didn't make the final cut. Okay. Are you like reaching for it? It's on the tip of your tongue, right? I know it too, or at least I used to know it. Okay. Kill, steal, covet, adultery, false witness, one God, no idols, honor the Sabbath.
I'm sure that both those 2 are
Parents.
perpetration of God.
Yeah. Okay. It's all right. We will get to see them. You know, the 10 Commandments, notoriously difficult to memorize. And also, kind of difficult to kind of figure out why these 10 and not others. Okay, so today we are continuing our exploration of some of the early stories in the Bible. And the Bible, again, Bible is a Latin word. It means the book. Although really, the Bible, like the Hebrew Bible is 24 books. The Christian Bible is 66 books, or 72 books, depending on whether or not you count the Apocrypha, those books that are hidden away, which take place between the Old Testament and the New Testament. The editors, the assemblers of our current Bible, were concerned that, like, once the Greeks invaded, that their stuff was going to be so infectious that anything that was written during the period of the Greek, domination might have Greek ideas in it and therefore could not be considered fully sacred. So that's why some Bibles will have the Old Testament and then the Apocrypha, the hidden books, and then the New Testament. Okay, but the Apocrypha, the hidden books, they're not as interesting as their hiddenness makes them out to be. Although there are some good stories. Okay, now the Bible is a library. It contains 10 Commandments. Now, the 10 Commandments appear in the biblical book of Exodus. Then they appear again in the biblical book of Deuteronomy. And yet, there are, if you're looking through the Bible, if you're looking for those 10 Commandments, there are other places where you see constellations of like that same basic group of laws. And we're going to talk a little bit later in this session about kind of some of the different versions and how the 10 Commandments that we know may have developed. But it looks like what we've got in Exodus and Deuteronomy, which are almost the same but do have some minor differences, that they represent kind of two final drafts of something that has already been developing and it's been drafted over the course of time. So if we were to say, what were the 10 Commandments in the time of Moses and the time of, Moses going on to Mount Sinai, that we can't really say. And a lot of the 10 Commandments are going to be broken in the Moses story. For example, he kills somebody, but he's still basically okay. The people make a golden calf. A bunch of them get killed, but they're still basically all right. Okay. And then, as we know, the first king of Israel, King David, broke most of the 10 Commandments, especially stealing, killing, adultery, and there's a scene in the Bible where assassins come to kill David in the night. He hides, and his wife picks up an idol, a statue of another god that's standing next to their bed, and puts it onto the bed with his blanket over it so that people will think that it's him, which is such a charming, and it's a funny story. It's a good story. But also, why did David have this life-size idol of another god next to his bed? So King David, as we know, he was a commandment-breaking machine. He was like the Terminator of 10 Commandments. As far as I know, I think if you read through the Bible closely enough, you can find him breaking all of them. And yet, he was still pretty much okay. All right. So here we are. Now, the story of the 10 Commandments comes when the Hebrews have been liberated from Egypt. So let's remember what's happened in the Bible so far, if we're paying close attention geographically. In the beginning, God creates the skies and the land, whatever. The Garden of Eden has 4 rivers flowing out of it. One is the Tigris, one is the Euphrates. That means the Garden of Eden story takes place here, not in Israel, but in Mesopotamia, at the meeting place of the Tigris and the Euphrates. And the first 11 chapters of the book of Genesis are here. Adam and Eve, Noah, the Tower of Babel, all of that is here. The Tower of Babel falls, and then we are introduced to Avram, and Avram is here in Mesopotamia. God calls to him and says, come to the land that I will show you, and the Bible moves here. Now, we follow Avram and Sarah. As a matter of fact, if we're reading closely, and please don't ever read this closely, but Abraham and Sarah go here and they get a chilly welcome and they find that the promised land is already full of people who are hostile toward them. So they go here to Egypt, where Abraham shows up with his wife Sarah. The Pharaoh sees her and says, who's that girl? And Abraham says, she's my sister. And the Pharaoh says, can I marry your sister? And Abraham is like, what's in it for me? Pharaoh says, I'm going to give you tons of wealth. And so the Pharaoh does marry Sarah, Abraham's wife, who is also his half-sister. They do have the same father. And then on their wedding night, the Pharaoh is so excited, and then a pestilence goes through Egypt. And the Pharaoh then, without consummating his marriage to Sarah, goes back to Abraham and says, dude, who is this woman? Abraham says, well, she is my sister, but she's also my wife. And the Pharaoh says, take your stuff and go. Get out of here. But Abraham is now rich. He's now wealthy. Now he comes back to Canaan, and he's actually doing pretty well. Like, he's a shepherd, but he's got some wealth from conning the Pharaoh. And so Abraham also kind of breaks some of the 10 Commandments. But he's pretty wealthy. He does pretty well. His offspring, they do get to live there. The natives put up with them because they are kind of well-to-do. And then there's that thing where, like, Joseph, Abraham's, I think, great-grandson Joseph gets kidnapped by his brothers, sold into slavery in Egypt. Then there's a famine in Canaan, and the Hebrews, who are now starving to death, they go to Egypt, and they say, we will work for you if you will give us food. So how do the Hebrews become slaves in Egypt? They sell themselves into servitude. And they're doing this for a while, and then there came a Pharaoh who did not know of the story of Joseph and said the Hebrews are becoming too numerous, and they're going to make a big problem for us, and we need to start oppressing them and doing all this awful stuff. So begins the Exodus story. Now the Hebrews need to get out of Egypt. Okay, so they're here. They are going to walk from Egypt to Canaan. The Bible tells us there are like 3 to 6 million people who are now going to walk across the desert. Now, Egypt is protected by desert. It's protected from armies coming in, and it's protected from slaves getting out, because nobody can carry enough water to make it across the desert. But the Hebrews are going to make it across the desert. Now, if you walked from Egypt to Canaan, that would take you about 3 weeks if you had enough water to get there. It'd take you about 3 weeks. Matter of fact, the Hebrews start walking toward Canaan, and they see it, and they're just within sight of it. And then God gets angry at them, drags them back into the wilderness, and they spend about 40 years wandering around in Arabia. 40 years in the wilderness, and while they're in the wilderness, God has become so angry with them that he summons Moses up onto a mountain and says, I'm going to reveal to you a law code So this is the biblical. Any questions about that? Now the Bible, there's all this like wacky stuff that goes on in the Bible. They don't preach about it on Sunday mornings, and it's too bad. Like that story about Abraham and Sarah in Egypt. Like that's the kind of Bible reading you get on some like gloomy Tuesday morning, but never on a Sunday. But if you open up a Bible, I think it's like Genesis chapter 11. It's one of those wacky stories. Okay, now. The Exodus story, which is like the biggest miracle in the Old Testament, is that somebody managed to get out of Egypt on foot. And the only way that they made it, according to the story, is that Moses was able to strike a rock with his like magical stick and water came out. And then God made some kind of manna, some kind of like wheat fall from the sky, the manna from heaven. All right. The parting of the Red Sea, it is a birth image. It's a creation image. Like, in the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void. There was darkness on the face of the deep. And then God separated the sky from the land and separated the land from the sea. In the Exodus story, God kind of does that again. He separates the sea to bring about dry land. The people start walking across. The Pharaoh chases them. The waves crash. The Pharaoh drowns. That Pharaoh is never mentioned in any Egyptian document. So we don't know who it was. But the Egyptians never say one of our pharaohs drowned in a mysterious crashing of the Red Sea. Anyway, okay. But it is like a birth story or like a baptism story in which this group of people is symbolically reborn by passing through this body of water. They're going to start over again. And something fascinating does not happen, which is that when the people are crossing, they say, well, who's in charge? Moses, who's this kind of morally ambiguous figure, but he's also a giant. He's very, very dangerous. And they say, does that mean that Moses is going to be our king? No, Moses is not going to be a king. God does not make him a king. And then the people arrive in the promised land in Canaan. And the question keeps coming up. Are we going to be a nation? Are we going to be a king? And the answer again and again is, no, you're not going to be a nation. You're not going to have a king. So for 200 years, the people, the Israelites, are these 12 tribes, but there's no central authority. There's no king. And instead of giving them a king, excuse me, instead of giving them a king, God gives them these laws, these rules. And the 10 Commandments are going to be the king of Israel for a while. And they're designed to give everybody in Israel equal access to God. But as we'll see, they're not going to give anyone special access. They're going to be there to kind of protect the people from the rise of a very powerful priesthood that can restrict access to God. And they're going to be to protect the Israelites from economic domination, from like some people getting extra wealthy. Oh, that's the one we missed. Taking the Lord's name in vain. They're going to protect the people from losing what they have, while to a consolidation of wealth. So the first 5, as we'll see, the first 5 of these commandments are going to be organized around essentially, you could say, like protecting the people from religious domination And the second 5 are going to be about protecting people from economic domination. The first commandment, you will have no other gods before me. Actually, in Hebrew, it says, you will have no other gods beside me. You will have no other gods next to me. And this is a commandment that forbids the multiplication of gods. Now, for people who are just coming out of like Egypt and Babylon, these are societies in which there are many gods. The Canaanites had many gods. When you have multiple gods, what you immediately find is a hierarchy of gods. It's kind of a power pyramid of gods. So this commandment in which there will not be multiple gods, one of the things that it does is it says there's not going to be a hierarchy of gods. And if there's no hierarchy of gods, then you can't use that to justify a hierarchy of people, which is what polytheism was being used for in Egypt, Babylon, Canaan, and Syria. Instead, there was going to be this one God as king, and that all members of the community were going to have equal access to this God. The second commandment is about creating images, essentially about creating idols. Because in ancient Babylon, like in ancient Egypt, imagine this, they had idols that were like, in Egypt they had like those massive stone idols. In Babylon they had them too, but they also had human-sized marionette idols, human-sized wooden puppet idols, that every day had to be taken out of bed and dressed in fine clothing, and then they would sit the puppets down at tables piled high with food, and then they would put the puppet in its throne in the temple, and then at the end of the day they would feed it again piles of food, and because it was Babylon, also gallons of beer. And then they would take the idol, take its clothes off, put its nightshirt on, and put it back to bed. So they did these things with their gods, who were these life-size marionette idols. Now, while the idol sat in its temple, people could come to see it, and they could bring it gifts that the idol did not keep. The priests of the temple got to keep the stuff. They would give it food, the priests of the temple got to eat the food and drink the beer. And when people asked the idol questions, the priests of the temple got to answer those questions on behalf of that god. So, having gods that are marionettes, that are controlled by human beings, obviously is going to be one way in which people can try to claim religious and economic power over each other. It was a pretty good way, actually, to get rich. Now, this is forbidden in the Ten Commandments. There again, as a way of making sure that no human being was going to be able to use the God of Israel as their personal puppet. And here I found this picture of somebody who's got a Jesus finger puppet and a cross finger puppet. The ancient Israelites, as Moses was coming down the mountain with the tablets of the Ten Commandments, which God had personally carved, God found that the people had created a golden bull calf. And they did this by melting down all of the gold that they had stolen from Egypt. And when Moses saw this, the first thing he did was he smashed the stone tablets of the Ten Commandments. Then he took the bull calf and he smashed that. That was then trampled into gold dust. It was mixed with water. The people were forced to drink the water. And 5,000 Israelites were killed And then Moses went back up the mountain, and God carved more commandments. This was the famous story of the golden calf. Where is the golden calf today? Wall Street. It turns out it's back. It's still around. I'm not personally bothered by this, except that this is my New York State taxpayer money going to protect the golden calf. So I would say, like, if you want to have the golden calf, that's fine. Please don't spend my tax dollars to protect it. All right. But here again, this is another one of those commandments that's there to protect the Israelites. Misusing the name of God, no, this does not refer to like when you drop your hammer and it lands on your toe and like you say God's name. What it means is using God's name for personal gain. For example, if you tell people like send prayer requests and money or else God will, get angry at you. Or if you send money, God will be happy with you. That would be breaking one of the 10 Commandments. That's really pretty serious. The next one is the long one. I know, this is, usually you can like kind of fit the 10 Commandments. For this one, you can be like, observe the Sabbath. What this does, and it's actually really fascinating, there's a good reason it has to be so long, is that they don't want there to be any loopholes about this. It says, on the Sabbath day, you will not work, your children, your son and daughter will not work, your male and female slave will not work, your servants will not work, your ox, your donkey, your livestock will not work, the resident alien in your town also will not work. Just people who are passing through, kind of looking for a day's work, for a day's wage as they're moving on to the next thing. This is one day in which everybody, male and female, rich and poor, even human and livestock, everybody gets one day off every week. One day of not working. Working includes cooking. You got to do your cooking beforehand. It includes lighting candles. It includes, anything. And there is this one day of equality. Everybody gets to rest, but it's not a day of doing nothing. It's a day in which people are commanded to remember their history of oppression and injustice. And the idea is that if you spend one day a week remembering the history of oppression, you will be less likely to oppress other people. It's very important. I pass by churches sometimes that say, the 10 Commandments, they're not the 10 suggestions. But this one, don't drive a car, don't light a candle, don't cook on Saturday, from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday. This is the most commonly broken of the 10 Commandments, and in Christianity, this one is considered a suggestion. It's a suggestion that nobody follows. All right. Who is going to help you to remember all of this stuff? These people, the elders, the older generation in the community. So somebody once came up to me and said, hey, you were teaching about the 10 Commandments. My father used to beat me up, and then he would say that I couldn't do anything or call the cops because honor your mother and father. I said, look, your father is a psychopath. No, that is clearly not what this commandment is saying. The commandments are there to protect people from domination. So if somebody is using one in order to hurt somebody else, that is obviously a misuse of the commandments and a misuse of God's name. Now, these first commandments have been about the people's relationship with God, and then come the commandments about the people's relationship within this human community. You will not murder. This is sometimes mistranslated, thou shalt not kill, but we know the Bible says all of these commandments are punishable by the death penalty. And we know that the Hebrews are about to enter Canaan and kill a lot of people. We know that a lot of Hebrews are going to get killed in the wilderness for breaking these laws. As a matter of fact, it could be argued that Moses probably killed more Hebrews than Pharaoh did, after you actually look at the Bible. Now, capital punishment, which exists in the Bible, warfare, which exists in the Bible, both of these things are community decisions. So this commandment is that you, the individual, you will not take this upon yourself. If somebody's going to get killed, if a member of this community is going to get killed, it's got to be a community decision. Also, this only applies to people within that Hebrew community. It does not apply to killing people outside of it. You will not commit adultery, obviously, although this is one of those commandments that did not generally apply to men. This is something that applied to women. For example, when we're reading in the Gospels and they drag that woman into the middle of the street, they say, Jesus, this woman was caught in the act of adultery, therefore, according to the law, we will stone her to death. Nobody in the crowd says, if she was caught, there must have been two people. Where's the other one? Where's the guy? Wasn't he equally caught in the act of adultery? Because this is one of those commandments in which there is a double standard in the Bible. This actually pertains primarily to male inheritance and the fear that one man's property could be inherited by another person who seemed to be his biological son but was actually the biological son of somebody else. So the adultery commandment largely has to do with stealing somebody's property by getting their wife to bear your son, and then he'll inherit your stuff. The Ten Commandments, I should say here, like they're not particularly like friendly. We see one of the commandments, you will not steal, and then a couple of commandments later, one says you will not covet your neighbor's stuff. The Hebrew word in this commandment is not property theft. The Hebrew word actually is kidnapping. The commandment is you will not kidnap another person in order to sell that person into slavery. Like, for example, in the story of Joseph and his brothers kidnap him and they sell him as a human slave. The commandment is saying you can't do that. As far as property theft, that gets covered later. This one, because the King James translators translated this one as you will not steal, then they also had to mistranslate this one. And this last one, that's the one that said, you will not steal your neighbor's wife or your neighbor's stuff. The translators translated instead, you will not desire your neighbor's wife or your neighbor's stuff. And then, you will not give false testimony against your neighbor. You will not publicly accuse them of something and say that you saw them do something when you did not see them do it. So, these commandments, these are primarily about protecting the community members from each other and to protect each person's right to possess the essentials of survival and then to transmit those to the next generation so that those people could possess the essentials of survival. Do we have any questions about that? It's about to get complicated, so, you know. The Ten Commandments, like I said, there are multiple drafts of the Ten Commandments that appear in the Bible. Interestingly enough, there are certain drafts in which the list continues, in which there are 12 or 13 commandments. So at one point in the book of Deuteronomy, we hear a list of the 10 commandments. It sounds just like the ones that we know. And then it continues. You will not withhold the wages of poor and needy laborers, whether other Israelites or aliens who reside in your land in one of your towns. So this commandment, it was saying, if somebody, whether they're an Israelite or they're just a like migrant worker passing through, if they show up in the morning and you say, I will pay you to work for me for one day, one of the commandments says, you will not then at the end of the day say, like, stick around and I'll pay you tomorrow, or like stick around and work for me again and I'll pay you then for both days. It says you have to pay that person on that day. And again, this gives them the option of whether they want to continue to try to work for you one day at a time or move on. You will not deprive, and this I think is the really fascinating, these last two, I think are really fascinating, and it's really too bad that these didn't make the final cut. You will not deprive a resident alien or an orphan of justice. Now, a resident alien, meaning a migrant worker, was somebody who had no was somebody who had kind of no like legal standing in the area, and they didn't have family relatives that they could go to help them. For example, if they worked for you for a day and you didn't pay them, it was understood. The migrant workers don't have somebody who's there to protect them or relatives to like back them up. So one of the 10 commandments is there to protect them, is to say, if you like cheat or defraud somebody who is vulnerable, someone who doesn't have relatives and is not part of Israel, God himself will protect that person and come after you. The orphan, again, somebody who has no father, no property, no relatives. And having no father meant that you kind of had no legal standing. So again, there is a protection for people who are not protected. And you will not take a widow's garment in pledge. Now, what this is saying is basically, your ancient Israelite only owned 2 articles of clothing: their outer coat, which was also their blanket, and their underwear. And this is saying that if a widow, if a woman whose husband is dead, like if she owes you money, you can't take her clothing away. It was the last thing you could collect from somebody who was indebted to you. Once you took away their coat, which was also their blanket, that was essentially a death sentence for that person. It meant that they were never going to get back up again. And this is somebody who's already lost their land, their stock, everything else. So it's saying that if there's a widow and she has really lost everything until she's got only this one thing left, you can't take that away, even if she owes you money. So the 10 Commandments in the Bible, in some earlier drafts, there were 13 commandments. Or if we counted up all of the commandments in the Torah, there are 613 commandments. with some repeats. Anyway, but these, it makes me sad because when I read these and I think about the modern United States, so then I think like this should be part of the law. The Ten Commandments, I have been told that they are the same as the U.S. Constitution, the same as the Bill of Rights. Is this true? No. The Constitution, the Bill of Rights, that is there to protect personal wealth from being taken away by the government. The Ten Commandments are there to protect the common people from inequality, from injustice. Oh, here's that thing that says, these are not the 10 suggestions. That's very funny because this person really has kind of made one graven image and put it on top of another graven image. Plus, they've created, now, who's this a picture of? Moses, and then we also kind of create God in the image of Moses. Like when we close our eyes and think about God, we think of this old big bearded man. We're thinking about, he's not white in this picture. Yeah, it's true. But anyway, so like multiple 10 commandments are broken by the person who created this image. It doesn't matter that it's not carved in stone. Okay. Are the 10 commandments the same as U.S. law? How many of these can you be arrested for in the United States? Worshipping gods other than the God of Israel. You cannot be arrested for that. Creating idols, you cannot be arrested, or else a lot of the church people would be in jail. And not to mention anybody who wears a cross around their neck would also be in jail. Misuse of the Lord's name, nope. Keep the Sabbath and you know, whatever. You can't be arrested for that. Honor your mother and father, nope. Murder, yes, that's one. Adultery, no. Theft, yes. Bearing false witness, sometimes. I'm going to say half. Like, that depends on how expensive your lawyer is. Coveting stuff, no. That would be 2.5 of the 10 commandments that you can be arrested for in the United States. Therefore, anybody who says that the 10 commandments are basically like American law is only about 25% correct. Okay. But these commandments, again, the reason that they're not the same is that they have kind of an opposite. They have an opposite purpose. U.S. law is designed to help individuals to accumulate wealth, to get other people's wealth, to get other people's stuff, and to protect it so that the U.S. government can never take it away and share it with the poor people again. I mean, this is one of our big public debates right now. Should the U.S. government be allowed to tax wealthy people to redistribute their wealth to poor people? Who keeps voting to stop that? The poor people. Overwhelmingly, it is poor people bamboozled by rich people to keep voting to say, do not tax the rich, do not give their wealth to the poor. That is the power of Christianity, is to get poor people to vote to give more stuff to rich people. Whatever. Only two things will make people act against their own interests in that way: rabies and religion. That's it. Okay, but this has been a brief introduction to the 10 Commandments. The law and Judaism is going to get a lot more complex, and in our next session, because we haven't done like the Talmud yet, right? And we're just getting started here. Okay, good. So in our next session, we're going to continue this exploration of the Bible, and then we're going to take a look at how we get from biblical religion to modern Judaism and what that is. So thank you very much. I will see you next month. Or no, I'll see you before next month. I'll see you at the very end of this month because I'll be here on Easter. So I'll see you again on Easter Sunday.
Comments about the cross has reminded me of a joke when I heard Robert Klein at a